So I've just got back from the RTM Tape Expo thing at the Strong Room Music Studio in London to learn all about analog tape and why we should all be using it for music production in 2025. It was an interesting event, very thought-provoking. Certainly provoked a lot of thoughts in me, which I will share with you at the end of the video in a semi-coherent way, so stick around for that. But in the meantime, enjoy the fact that I sat there like a twat all day, pointing my phone at every speaker that took to the stage, in order that I could cobble together this compendium of pertinent points raised throughout the day, and then offer my reflections at the end about what I think about the utility of analog tape in this day and age, and whether I think it's a good investment or not. So yeah, I'll speak to you again at the end of the video, and in the meantime, enjoy. I'm on my way to the Strong Room Music Studio in London to the RTM Tape Expo. Should be interesting. Got their name tag.
Come and sit over here. It's way more comfortable. So then, okay, so I'm based in North London. I have a analog-based studio. I've got some photos which I'll show you. It's based around a 70s MCI console. It's MCI 528. The first console that was, maybe I would say, probably affordable. You know, it was probably like half the price of some of the other big boards, the APIs and the Neve consoles and stuff. And that stage, only a couple of years back when I bought it, it was the only board that I could really afford to buy. Still felt it had some sound, you know, had a vibe. So that's the centerpiece of my studio. And then around that, I have a heap of tape machines. And I'll maybe go a bit in on why tape happened for me. There was someone locally selling this MCI tape machine for £700 or something back then. And I didn't have a clue about tape. I took a punt and bought it. It sat there. I didn't know what to do. Techs were £300 at that time. You know, in your early 20s, I didn't have the money for that. So I just sat there for ages. And then I heard that there was this guy in Nashville called Steve Sadler, who has unfortunately passed away now. He was a guru. So he would, you know, I'd message him if I hadn't, you know, he helped me get it back up to life. And if I had an issue, he'd say, okay, I'm not going to do that. Position the laptop, you know, in front of the screen, and he'd position it in front of the screen and he'd say, go behind it, press here, you know, almost like that. And the machine would just come to life, you know. And that was just, it was such a magic experience for me, because I said, this guy must know, he must have worked on so many of these tape machines over the years. So Steve got me into MCI, Steve got me into tape. And when I started recording on tape, that experience of playing it back was such a game changer, actually. Because at that time, I just assumed, you know, drums on tape, percussion on stage, stuff with transients, you know, stuff that you must have, but actually it was just the vocals and the guitar. And when I pressed play back on tape, I honestly believe it was maybe better than when I heard it in the room. I don't know if that's, it's probably very controversial, but I just got sucked into that playback of the music there. And I was like, this is probably the first time that I've experienced an experience where I record something and I want to just continuously hear it back. You know, so all absorbing, or and I was hooked, and that was it. And after that, I started buying tape, and I realised back at the time, not upsetting the RTM people, but tape was £150. You'd drive up to Studio Spares on the A406 and you'd get some tape, and it was just, I just kept buying tape and recording, and I really fell in love with that process. My process back then was one of discovery and, doing a lot of stuff wrong. But now I've kind of got to a stage where I've managed to refine the workflow and integrate an analog recording process into my work with current clients. And, quite bigger artists now are happy for me to load up a roll of tape, and labels are happy for me to buy tape, which is like, that wasn't a consideration back then. So I think it ties back into what we were saying in the beginning about this re-emergence of a desire to have your music recorded on analog. I feel like a lot of artists maybe don't know quite what it is. The concept of this process is being different and being, sitting down on the floor, for example. I just have like a little small remote that I shuttle, and I'll pick up a guitar, and not having to look at a screen and not having to loop something back, not being able to loop something back, actually, the limitation of that seemed to really, it just seems to appeal to talk to a kind of more human side of the creation of music, actually. So it really lets it, so I had the machine on in the corner of my room, and more often than not, actually, on the first time when I'm meeting an artist or creating something, I won't have a laptop on. I'll close the screen and we'll just sit down, and I'll just shuttle back and forth on a reel, and it's usually just a reel that's been going around for quite a while. I won't put a new reel on. And it just feels right. It just feels kind of organic, even before you talk about the sonic, impact of it. The actual process of creating in this very organic way, where actually you're not having to use your eyes, just using your ears, feels really good, actually, and different. It shouldn't, because this is the way it was for the longest time we've been recording like this, but it feels almost radical to go back to this way of creating and capturing stuff. Sometimes I'll record a band, like Foles, for example. I'll get Foles in the room and we'll just record to tape for the whole day and then bounce down 30 minutes. This is at the slower speed. So I generally record, that's all the time I record at 15 IPS for what it's worth, because I like the bottom end. I'm not too fussed about the high-end detail that is lost and the twinklies up above. I just like the way that the weight that I get, actually, recording on 15 inch, particularly on some of these American machines that I use. So let's move into tape machines. So I started on MCI JH16, 16 track tape machine. So that means I can record 16 channels on 2-inch tape, 16 channels of audio. And I just felt that was the one that I told you, my first tape machine. I fell into that format of 16 channels and 2-inch tape, and I've stuck with it. I've tried to stick with it. I didn't know at the time that's actually the most desirable. People love recording us on 16 channels, 2-inch tape. Didn't know that, but that's what I've stuck in. So I've actually bought 3 16-channel 2-inch tape machines of different manufacturers. So I've got a 16-channel 2-inch MCI. I'm going to show you the pictures because you might as well use the laptop for a bit. I'll show you quickly. This is an 8-track 440B Ampex 1-inch tape machine from the late 60s, and there's loads of gear, clav and bits in front of it because it hasn't been used. A great sounding tape machine, American, sounds very fat, has a kind of like an edgy mid-range sound, like quite a cool, just ballsy, punchy sounding machine. I really, really like it. And I also use the a 2-channel version of this as well, which is phenomenal. That's the Scully. That's the Scully 2-channel. This belonged to Bright Eno, and he had it in, there's a Susan Clapton or something like that. Anyway, that needs a bit of love, but that's a great sounding 2-track. There's the 3M. This is such a great sounding tape machine. This was used Sly Stone. This is my favourite tape machine model, without a doubt, to record multi-tracks. This is an Ampex MM1200 tape machine. Now, it came with a 24-channel head stack, and I changed it to a 16 channel head stack, which costs almost as much as the tape machine, actually. This sounds great. I love this. This is kind of my kind of baby at the moment. I want the 3M going. So I love tape. I love tape, and maybe just more to talk more about what the kind of feeling I get from it when I record the tape. Where I've ended up is when I record stuff on tape, I have a feeling that I'm going to keep it. When I record stuff in the digital world without tape, I couldn't say if it's even 50-50. I just don't. I almost know that I'm not going to keep it when I record digitally. But when I go to tape first, there's a good chance that even a mistake or anything I record will end up making it onto the final record. When I listen back to stuff on tape, I feel like I can kind of climb into the music. There's like a depth. There's a size, which is partly to do with the scientific, the head bump on the tape machine and, all that kind of sonic stuff. But there is this depth that goes back. And my kind of rookie feeling is that, even at a really high sample rate, and this is not an analog digital debate because I'm supposed to talk about how tape and digital work together. But when I record on digital, I have a feeling that these super snapshots of recording are missing detail in those little, even at that really high sample rate. I'm sure someone else will have a really better argument to argue against that, but that might be my reason why it is. But when I record analog, I feel like I can get inside the recordings. The size is there. It's a very forgiving medium. I can record stuff loud, and usually something comes back, and I'm kind of into it, even if it's not right. You try that on digital, and you won't be listening back for very long. Your ears won't. Artists, musicians love the idea that they're involved with a process that maybe draws them closer to their heroes. A lot of the references that people come to me with are actually quite similar. D'Angelo, Marvin Gaye, Stevie, a lot of soul references, or old reggae references, or Afrobeat. And the commonality between those references is that they all recorded on old tape machines and analog desks and stuff like that. That equipment was part of it. Obviously, talent is way more important, but that part played a part, and I think they see that I have that stuff and some of the music side, and they go, okay, cool, this is what we want to make something substantial, we want to make something that feels, like it has something timeless about it or whatever, and they come and use those references, and, more often than not, we get to a place that I feel like I'd love to listen back to this in X amount of years or whatever, I usually set up my machines up with 911 tape, +6, quite a very standard setup, and I don't record in super hot because I feel that, particularly with bass and things like kick drum, I lose a lot of the transient. The more I go into it, the more it turns into mush. It's quite a common thing. They knew back in the day, they actually had Dolby units and stuff where they could record actually at very conservative levels, keep that transient, keep some of that detail, but not have such a high noise floor. But I don't use Dolby, so I just try. My records end up sounding quite hissy. I kind of like it. It kind of works for me. Tape and electronic music go hand to hand. It's not just acoustic recorded instruments that sound great on tape. I have loads of old drum machines. I have 808, original 808s and BMXs and synths and stuff. Recording stuff on tape, oh my God, some of my favorite records from, 70s Japanese artists and a lot of the kind of new wave stuff. You again, just A/B it, record that stuff digitally and record some stuff to tape, and you'll see that the warmth and the capture and the kind of the glue, for want of a better term, Also, when you push drum machines into tape, it does a really cool thing. You can't push drum machines into digital and get anything, but when you start pushing stuff into tape, you find that it really starts to sound really fat and thick, and that, So, yeah, that was everything. Cheers. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Just out of interest, who's calibrated the machine before?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see how we go on. So, I mean, this is especially useful, this kind of fluxivity chart. I always end up looking up this on Google. We'll get to that later. I don't know if everyone wants to see. We can probably pass some of these reels round. Do you want to get that? I might just have on. Yeah. So what I've got here is a Neumann interface, and I'm sending out a -20. The interface is a +24 full scale. So I've already set up, so we've got parity coming out of Pro Tools, and then coming through the machine on input. Okay, and then coming back through to give us the same level back. So we know that on our input. We should probably ignore this meter. This one is not behaving as expected. And then the first thing I would do is clean the heads, demag the machine. So we've got some IPA and cotton buds. So I'll tend to sort of squirt a little bit on here, and then I'll clean the heads with the tape path, never across, so that we can, so we don't end up sort of scratching across the head potentially. If there's any sort of abrasive dust, very gently. Sometimes you'll find you'll get a kind of brown stain on here from some of the tape that's been shedding. If we end up with a lot of dirt on the heads, then tend to dull the top end, our bias level won't be right, etc. So once I've done that, also should probably move the MRLs around. They're all over there. So for this, I'll actually turn the machine off. We can just mute that on there. So this is a degauser, and it creates a kind of vibrating magnetic field, which actually demagnetizes all the portions of all of the transport, all the metal parts, because as the tape runs through, it sort of transfers some of its magnetism gradually onto the heads and onto the spindles, etc. When you put it near metal, it sort of vibrates in your hand. You sort of feel it, and you'll end up sort of coming at it from one direction, waving around, putting it near all the metallic parts of the machine, the heads, taking it across, and moving it near all of these things, just to sort of reduce the magnetism that's in the tape transport. And then I'll tend to come away directly. That's the action. If you unplug that, just a quick thing. So I'll put this machine back on. Right, so I've got to find that. So, this machine's pretty versatile. There's actually not a lot of machines have a reference fluxivity switch. So this will actually, I think it's 180, 250, and 320. And our tapes, all of my tapes are 250. And I use that chart that's in your booklets to actually, if I find a machine that's got a different fluxivity level, I'll use that to allow myself to understand which level I should be hearing from the tape machine. Sorry, at the beginning of the tape, it will tell you what's on the tape. We can listen to him.
MRL calibration test, IEC utilization at 250 nanowatts to extrinsic compensation. 1 kilohertz.
Great. Okay. So I'm just going to find the repro gain, which is at the top here on the C channel. And we're aiming for that same level before, which should be -20. Very hot. Around here. If I'm within 1 dB, I'm usually happy. Okay. And if we wait long enough, we'll have the 10K tone. Yeah. And then the next thing we're going to calibrate is the repro EQ. So we've got a separate EQ control depending on the speed that we have. because obviously at lower speeds we end up with less height, less top end. And there we go. So we've got a bit of disparity on the right hand side. Left hand side looks pretty good. There we go. And it's pretty prudent to then go back to the 1K tone just to see if that's affected it. So we can see that we're now slightly soft on that side. So it's a bit of an iterative process sometimes to go around the 1K tone and the 10K tone. Oh, so I'll just correct that. What's really annoying about these machines is that you've got some drivers that are flat and some drivers that are cross. So you keep swapping screwdrivers. So I'm going to check for the record level trimmer. Just bring that a bit more up to where I want it to be. I'm going to run out of juice on that. And then we should see, if we turn down the bias, this signal will completely die. Here we go. On the left. Can everyone see that? Mm-hmm. As I come up, if I keep turning, it will actually peak and then drop back. So what you'll tend to do is sort of memorize where it peaked, and then once it peaks, you keep adding bias and then drop it back. So if an engineer asks you for sort of 1 dB over bias, the bias level will be 1 below where it peaked. Okay. People have different tastes and things. There's official overbiasing in the manuals, but these days I get all sorts of requests back for that. So if we look on the one on the left here, it's been taking the bias out and it's peaked at roughly what, 8 there? Okay, and then we can drop it back to about 10. So that might be sort of 2 dB over bias. That might.
So that's, she's winding the same direction, and then it hits a sort of rocker point, and then comes back down.
There's so much flutter in this machine. Can you see that's peaking at about 6, and then it starts to drop back, even though I'm adding more bias. So the bias signal is drowning out the audio signal.
So effectively there, the bias energy is something that's being applied at a very, very high frequency, something you can't hear. So it's typically 40 to 150K, I think.
That's right.
And it depends, it's set depending on the head that's in the machine. It's set by the manufacturer what that frequency is going to be.
And it will increase the magnetic field of the tape head, so that it sort of gets the transfers of energy is better. It's like a carrier wave from the tape. What you'll have is a sort of bias signal that's maybe 80 to 100 volts, and it's a very, very fast sine wave. And what you'll see is the audio signal as a sort of modulation of that. So you'll get a very thick, very loud bias signal, and then it's about maybe like 100 to 1 volt in terms of voltage between the bias signal and your audio signal. Which just sort of blew my mind, I think, when I first discovered this about tape years ago, that somehow someone discovered that was the thing to do to sort of improve the fidelity of the medium. And it just sort of increases the level, gets into a better space, improves your noise floor, and then improves also the top end fidelity. It also, as you add it, it sort of changes the harmonic content as well, and you'll find that if you do a sweep with different bias levels, you'll sort of get a different curve, an EQ curve. And it can also affect sort of EQ of your headroom. So as you push into more harmonic distortion, it will sort of give you a slightly different sense of overdrive at different frequencies depending on the bias level.
I think lunch is so
Thank you.
And today I want to talk a little bit about some of my process of using tape, creatively especially. And I think one of the kind of amazing things about that is you don't need to have a pristine machine always. You don't need to have it perfectly aligned for some of those kind of things that we're talking about. You know, I do really, there is something like about the sound of tape, and when you are recording to tape, it kind of feels a bit more real as a process. I think people adjust to it psychologically slightly differently as well, and it forces you to kind of do things kind of differently in your workflow from working in the box, digitally, which I think can be really beneficial. Just the fact when you get to the end of your tape reel and you have to press stop and rewind, that's like a couple of moments. There's a few minutes there for everyone to kind of relax and regroup. And you listen to like songs from the 60s that speed up massively throughout that song. They start at a slow tempo and they end up at some kind of crazy wild speed at the end. And I think if you had the ability to just go stop and bang in again, that wouldn't happen. But when you have that kind of moment where you need to stop, rewind, reset, that mindset also allows for those things to kind of happen. First multi-track I started using was a Otari MTR90, which is a kind of like workhorse, like the Toyota of tape machines in my opinion, very reliable, holds its alignment very well. Really love Studer A800s, and I've just got myself an Ampex MM1200, which I'm incredibly happy about, though it still has some teething problems. That it weighs like 240 kilos and had to be carried down 3 flights of stairs, and the power supply didn't like that journey. It'd been sitting in one place for like 20 years, and so we're working on that at the moment. But I'm also generally not too fussy about the machines, and I also like, small, tiny little, lo-fi quarter-inch machines and things for what you can do with them. So I make a lot of tape loops and have used tape both as a kind of compositional tool, as kind of like digital sampling in a way with artists, which has been really fun. And again, I like about it is the kind of the unpredictability of the process and the happy accidents that can happen when that comes along. I do also use tape sometimes just when I'm mixing. I do a lot of mixing these days, and will print something to tape and back if I feel like it's going to benefit from that. And also just using it as an effects machine. I like using tape machines as a delay unit, and I mean, that's such a simple thing to do. I'm sure half of you are like yawn, but for some of you who are new to this idea, obviously if you're just feeding signal to tape and then recording that back into your computer and then send that back in to create a feedback loop, and then especially if your machine has vary speed, you can kind of alter the delay time there. So simple things like that with any kind of tape machine are super fun, and it doesn't even matter if it's something you got for a couple £100 off eBay, or if it's like a really high-end machine. They all will impart a different sound quality, but can be really fun to work with. And in the same way, you can do flanging, with a tape machine and Pro Tools, which is way more fun than using a plugin. So just recommend trying that kind of stuff out. And so I'm often, when I'm looking to kind of create some kind of bed of sound or texture, one of the interesting things is just to get people in the room and start making sounds in the key of the song, kind of higher up in the register, and it can be really fun. And sometimes it goes horribly wrong, sometimes it works out great, but it can be singing, humming, piano, whatever you feel like. And then the kind of classic thing is just to drop it down an octave, so play it at half speed and reverse the tape, and then you'll get instant textures. So I've got this here, which was done. This is basically that process. I mean, I can't even remember anymore. I often work really fast, so like when people ask me how did we do something a few years later, but some guitar, some voice stuff, definitely in there. And so yeah, it's just a bunch of tracks here, again, bunch of stuff run to tape, and then some of it I kind of edited, but we have the voices, singing. It sounds magical to me. And then piano. And at the time, this was on a Studer A80, and I think it had 7.5 IPS, and in that mode it was really wobbly. It wasn't working very well, which was great for this. So you can hear this piano is all like, as well as being reversed, is all wobbly. If I maybe unreverse it. There you can hear. So that's that, and then some guitar stuff.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Don't you find that when you put all these stems together, you just get a massive noise level?
You do obviously start getting lots of noise. I would say often these kind of textured tracks end up kind of quieter in the mix, so that doesn't matter. And you can also roll off some of the top end. But also on some of these, you'll see, like here, I've done some denoising on it as well. The track down at the bottom looks like it's had good old Z noise on it. But I mean, also like all that isotope stuff for the RX stuff's incredible these days. So I mean, really, hiss is a creative choice these days. If you want hiss, and often it is a kind of sonic glue, then it's there. And if you don't, you can get rid of it almost flawlessly, in my opinion. So the other thing I talked about is actually capturing kind of rhythmic loops, whereby you would start with a click track or some kind of beat, cut to a kind of loop of tape, maybe a two-bar loop or something like that, and then on a multi-track machine, asking musicians to play, and you're in record on your track, and the moment they play something you like, you just keep that, come out of record and keep that and move on. And you can use that as a very fun way of creating kind of beds of music. So yeah, the idea with that is just to, if I wasn't clear, that you would record a beat or a click or anything you want onto your tape machine, and then you got to cut that into a loop. And some machines are better than others. You know, some machines want like perfect tension. So, you know, I've like a Studer A827. I've not been, at least I can't do it. I can't get the machine to behave. It's too smart. So like the dumber the machine, the better, because you're kind of abusing it in this situation. So you need on an A800 you can loop. You just have to pull out the card that like controls the tension, and then basically, can I walk here? You would put tape across so they can't spin here, and then have your loop come around the mic stand. And you just need to kind of get the tension right so that it'll spin and play. And then after that, it's a question of just recording stuff onto those different tracks. And I think that's always a great idea, as well as recording the actual parts of the song, is just to record sounds and noises and things, because there's all those small little accidents and details that can kind of end up in there that can be really interesting. I've looked. There isn't much information online that I've found about making tape loops, and sometimes it's just like if you're interested in and you're looking to buy a machine, it's difficult to know. Like the NTR90 is another one that I've only been able to make a loop on it that's like exactly the length of going around the machine, and then using vary speed you can kind of alter the tempo a bit, but you can't do longer loops on that. So that's why the Ampex MM1200 is going to be great for me, because it is a really dumb machine. So it'll be great for making tape loops. So as well as that, I also just enjoy recording to tape. You know, especially I love having people play together live when possible. It's, you know, not that much music being made like that, but I'm always seeking that out. And when you have great musicians, capturing that live all to tape really is, you know, kind of magical process, and it does do something to the sound that makes it feel. It's not an honest capture, you know. We have digital for that, but it's a kind of magical capture, and it does something that's really interesting. The gain structure is incredibly important in that situation, because, you know, if you hit it too hard, like it just starts wiping all those transients off, and everything just turns to mush eventually. And you hit it too quietly, and you just, you know, end up with a massive amount of hiss. So that really is just like trial and error, and using your ears and trying to figure out what works for you and what you like. But I always hear things as getting kind of bigger and more open and with more hair on it, until it just suddenly kind of passes that limit and then starts to kind of close back in on itself. And things start to get kind of small at that point. But when we made the Smile record, that was all tracked on tape, and we really used that as a kind of limitation to try and kind of stick within that and track count, and stick within on tape until the very end. So we weren't even dumping into Pro Tools. We basically made 90% of the album all on tape, and Nigel Godrich, who was the producer, who's a master on tape. I mean, he was like chopping the multi-track together to like do the structure of the songs. You know, I'm still a bit terrified to do that without a backup or anything, but he's wild and just go for it. So, but he's that good as well. So, and like, I think what's interesting is, because obviously before digital existed and we had tape machines, you know, people wanted better and better fidelity with their tape machines, and cleaner tape machines and more accurate capture and playback. And obviously now that we have Pro Tools, I kind of feel like a lot of the time we want the opposite, you know, we want the tape machine for the vibe, for the character and the sound. You know, some of the more modern tape machines, in my opinion, are too good. You know, you record back on them and you're like, I don't really hear much of that tape sound. But I also record 15 inches per second, just, you know, for that extra kind of low-end bump and kind of character and vibe that gives. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Right, we're concentrating on orange juice. Feet won't touch the ground. Good so far. Firstly, can I say, you've got to support tape. It's the software with this format, and without you tape, your format is going to die pretty quickly. Because if you're going to be recording material, I would strongly advise that you don't go and buy used tape off various auction sites, because how do you know what the provenance of it is? You're committing your great creative ideas to tape, and then you find it's got a dropout in the middle of it. So advert for RTM and buy new tape. So your application, what are you going to do with these machines? Are you going to use them as a creative tool? We heard Mikko talking about tape loops, and incidentally mentioned about editing and those sort of areas that it branches off into. Are you going to use it to print down your final mixes? Or are you going to use it as a pass-through? And indeed, with your multi-track machine, are you going to use it as a pass-through machine to Pro Tools, or are you going to actually create a mixed master on that 1-inch, 2-inch tape? So you've got to think about all those applications before you jump in, because there's no getting away from it. Second per second, inch for inch, it is the most expensive audio recording format devised. Down the front here, got two machines, which I noticed. Got the Akai GX4000 and the good old Revox B77. If you're planning on doing tape loops, Mikko was talking about dump machines, and you want 2-track, your B77 is quite a nice machine. Get yourself a Mark II, because it's got the vari speed on it. And also I'd suggest get yourself what they call the HS, the high-speed version, 7.5, 15 imps. You can fool that machine into going into play or record and creating your own loop. If you want to get handy with your soldering iron, you can even whip the wires off the back of the erase head and just get it into record, and it'll carry on recording. Because remember, when the audio is recorded by the record head, it doesn't wipe it off. That's the erase head's job. So in other words, as the loop goes round, it will add more material, and you'll get almost a live tape loop as it goes. Or you can record your loop, edit it up, put it on the machine, and just press play and see what result you get. And again, using your mic stand or your broom handle to extend the loop out however far you need. This machine has also got the advantage that it takes 10.5-inch reels, so a good old reel size here, which is your professional format in the recording studio. But all that kind of stuff costs money. There's no getting away from it. So you might want to dip your toe in the water and get yourself a little Akai GX4000. They're about the absolute minimum of consumer machine that I would recommend. That indeed they're the ones I work on. I won't touch anything else, but lower than that. The little GX4000, Akai made loads of them, the Mark 1, the Mark 2, and all the DS, and ones with Dolby and all this kind of thing. Only takes 7.5-inch reels, will only run at 7.5 inches per second. But you could probably pick one of those up, even a pristine one, cosmetically great, electronically and mechanically brilliant, for about 300 quid. Half that price if you're prepared to have a few corners knocked off of it. If you've got to move up into your 1/4-inch machines, then you're looking at your Studas, your Ataris. This machine is an A810. In its current state, that machine will probably set you back about £6,500–7,000 if it was ready to go. They are reputed to be one of the most complicated, electronically complicated machines of the era. Came out in 1988, which is the other thing you've got to remember. In the professional sector, there are no new tape machines being made, haven't been made since about 1992. I think Atari were the last company to make tape machines. There are new consumer machines being made, but I really would steer clear of those for the professional format. Apart from anything else, those prices start at around about £20,000. But this machine, a lot of gubbins going on in here. They are like thoroughbred racehorses. When they run, they really run well. When they've got a few glitches, sometimes had these machines, you're like knocking one fault of a door down, and there's another door in the way, and you just keep knocking them down, the faults on these machines, until it comes good. A bit further down the line, there's the Studer A807, which is basically a later machine than this, despite the fact it had a smaller number, A810, A807. And they save money on the mechanics. It's got the rollers and the tension arm over here are missing. Mechanics cost money, Studer could save money. You might also want to consider American machines. The machine I know very well is the MCIs, or Sony MCI. Sony bought MCI at nearly the end of their life, so they got called Sony MCIs. And then there's the JH110. The 110's quite nice because this particular machine will take 10.5-inch reels. I asked today, there's no plans from RTM to make 14-inch reels. They were ginormous reels that went on the machine, which gave you an hour's recording time at 15 IPS, because 15 IPS, that will only give you half an hour recording time. But the 110 could. It could take 14-inch reels. And some of the other later Studas, if you've got very deep pockets, such as the A820, the A812, if I remember as well, all the later 1980s machines, and of course the famed A80 from the 70s, would take those larger 14-inch reels. But I can't stress, it's starting to get into quite an outlay, both to buy these machines, also what condition you're buying them in, and they would definitely, at some stage, need some work done on them. Because they're like a classical piano. You get this thing tuned up, it's all wonderful for you, sir, madam. Take it away to your studio, You stick it in the back of your van, you stick it in the back of your truck, bump it along the road, get it up the stairs, you can guarantee it's going to need some work. And bumping a great big machine like your multi-tracks up the stairs is no mean feat. Of those, we had this morning, Miles talking about 16-track machines. You've got a nice entry level, I would say, at the professional level, something like the Tascam MS16. I saw one of those on an auction site recently, and that went for £600, quite amazingly. But when we looked at it, it's certainly been around the park. So we had to, whoever works on it has got their work cut out to get it up to a certain level. The other thing about the professional sector is they don't tend to care what the external conditions like. And this wonderfully sprayed machine here, it doesn't matter if it's got a few corners knocked off of it, which means you can save money. If you're going into the consumer sector, some of these audiophiles, the audiophile brigade, they love the pristine bits, they love the big VU meters, they love all of that kind of stuff. You want the machines to handle the tape well. You want the machines to sound good. You want the machines to do what you want in the creative process. So if it's got the odd scratch on the front, who cares? Going back to our multi-tracks, you've got your Tascam MS16, comes in a nice trolley about the size of this A810, but it's got all the audio amps down the bottom, all your VU meters. You can see what the machine is up to in terms of recording and replay. We can then look at the MCIs. There's the MCI 16 or the JH16, or they changed it to 24. And then if you really want to get up into the stratosphere, you're into the A800s, which I believe Strongroom has got a couple of A800s across the way there. A machine from the 1970s, and then that was later replaced by the A820 in the 1980s. I personally love the A820 as a machine. They did it in quarter-inch and multi-track, or MCH as Stu would call them, format. Some people argue they're a bit clinical. They're a bit Swiss, they're a bit beautifully engineered. And that's what they sound. We've been talking about the creative process here in terms of tape machines sometimes adding those attributes that maybe digital formats or even plugins don't give you. And some people argue that the later Studas, the 10s, the 12s, the 27s, the 20s are a little bit clinical. I do like the MCI JH machines though. They achieve a lot with very little. If you look at a Studer inside there, beautiful, it's like a Swiss watch. Beautiful engineering. And clearly, the Swiss Germans have spent a lot of time working out the infinite tolerances on these machines, and it works beautifully. Look at an MCI, you lift the cover up, it looks like it's been built in a shed. The buttons, you can tell, have been bought off RS. There's bits like, well, we need this arm to come in. I know, we'll screw that in. That's done it. Now we need the roller to come in. Oh, another bit of bent metal. Let's just bend it out. But don't hold that back against the MCIs. They are very nice sounding machines. They're very easy to set up. So you've got your Studas at really high end. You've got your American machines, I'd say at the medium end. And sitting in between them like a cradle, that's medium high end, is your Japanese machines. But you've got some very nice Japanese machines like that, the Atari machines. And don't discount some of the Tascams. I've mentioned the MS16. But some of the lower end, still well built, good build quality, if you want to dip your toe into the water of multi-track. 8-track machines are quite cheap to buy. There's things such as the Tascam TSR8 uses half-inch tape, if I recall, and that's quite a nice machine. You can buy them quite cheaply, but don't expect, if you want to sell it, to get the same amount of money. They are not as popular as the 16s and the 24s. You might want to step up and go to the 1-inch MSR 24 from Tascam. That is a machine that's about the size of an A810, but it manages to pack 24 tracks of audio into a 1/8-inch tape. It uses DBX noise reduction to help it get that quality, and noise reduction is a completely different subject, and it's something I'd say beware how you use it. But it's quite great, good machine, good entry level into true 24-track recording. But the downside is, you think, well, why doesn't everybody go to these machines if they're so cheap? Why are we spending a lot of money on our A800s or A820s or MTR 90s? They are 2-head machines. Tape machine has 3 heads. Tape runs across the heads. It meets the erase head, which wipes things off. It meets the record head, which sticks the audio on, and it meets the replay head. There's a thing like a timecode head you might find later on, but we're not talking about that. But broadly three heads. The way that Tascam bring the price down on those, or brought the price down to make it entry level, was they had an erase head, and then they had a combi record replay head, which means you can't do off-tape monitoring, so you can't hear as it's recording what the replay is instantly, and that could be terrible if you have a tape drop out or the machine channels dropped out. You can't also do tape loops on the fly, because you've got to record it, make it into a loop, and then replay it. You can't do simultaneous record and replay. It does mean that they're very simple. They're a simpler machine, far simpler machines than the three-head machines, which have rows and rows of amplifiers to do all of the different functions. But the downside is you're losing functionality. And the other thing is, and I've no wish to knock it if anybody has got any past association or owns one, but Tascam's main rival in the 1980s was Fostex, and they produced some nice machines, the E16, the G16, the G24, and they also made the G24S, and the S stood for Dolby S. My strong advice to you is, if you have one or you've been offered one, buyer beware. What you've got to realise is that these machines are all dated from about the 1970s, 1980s. They're heading on to be 50, 60 years old. They were probably designed to be in landfill by 1995, 1996. I can tell you, I'm ex-BBC. When the BBC threw all their machines away in 2000, there were at least 100 of these babies and their associated ones in the basement of Broadcasting House, which when they blew the old foundations up to put the new building in, that lot was still in there. They all just went into the crusher. And that's your problem. Looking at longevity of all these machines, the Fostexes, they were effectively the project studio market of that time. They were built for a price, lots of plastic parts, lots of press steel parts, did a lot for the price, 16-track, 8, 16, 24-track machines you could get, but they also made a lot of compromises. And if you're just singling out the GS24 with a Dolby chip on it, one audio card did record, replay, bias, and all the noise reduction. And it's a great multi-legged beast that sits on the card. When that goes fut, you've lost a channel entirely, and you will not be able to buy another card for the very reason that all the other cards you're getting have gone fut as well. So you've got to be careful. You might think you're getting a bargain, but what are you actually getting underneath the hood? So really, I'd say if you are going to dip your toe into this format or expand your tape offerings, try to look beyond the glitzy lights, all the flashing stuff and all what it can do, and look at your application. What are you going to do with this machine? How much is it going to cost you to run? Because there's no getting away from it. Tape aside, a reel of 2-inch like that's going to cost you 230 some odd quid. You've got that to consider, and at 15 ips it'll only last you half an hour. But what is it going to cost you to run in maintenance? If the heads are a bit worn, how much are they going to cost to get them relapped or, heaven forbid, even replaced? You've got a channel. You can always guarantee on a 24-track multi-track machine, there's always one channel that's running a bit low or a bit high or a bit duller than the rest. There's always something that you have got to put some effort into, and that effort both in time and money, to correct those issues. So it's a great format. I don't want to, heck, I'm not going to turn people away from it. I might make a living from it. It's a great format, but you've got to realise what you're getting involved in. And happy to talk in the Q&A and afterwards. And I've got business cards, and this isn't the sales bit because I don't charge for it. Within reason, if you want to talk, give us a call, send me an email. That's the best way. All the other formats, I really try and push everybody into email. Happy to talk to you as to what you might, what kind of machine if you're interested in, and I can offer some advice. We can take it from there. So thank you very, very much.
So, interesting, eh? What are my thoughts about all of that? Well, I totally get it. I fully understand the appeal of recording to tape. I'm not someone who records to tape, but I do have a couple of tape machines. I've got the fabled Revox B77 and a smaller Akai machine, which I've occasionally used for digital transfers. I haven't really explored them much creatively. I bought them some years ago because I wanted to get into tape. When I worked at the University of Sussex, a friend of mine discovered a little TIAC reel-to-reel thing in a cupboard. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember that we sat in my office and transferred some of my recent mixes onto it. And you know, yes, there's a magic to it, a mechanical magic. And the way it fucks up the sound in that lovely tape way, you know, it was very, very appealing. I definitely felt that wow factor. And so, yeah, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I need to go out and buy a tape machine right now. And so that's what I did. Like, basically knowing nothing about tape, I did a little bit of research and ended up buying that B77. I took it to my studio and thought, oh my God, this is the thing. This is going to transform everything. I'm going to fly my mixes onto this and they're going to be all like analog and warm and punchy and cool. This is going to catapult me out of the digital domain and into the analog stratosphere. So I quite quickly discovered that flying a mix onto it did basically fuck all. In fact, every experiment I did revealed very little utility. It was a good condition tape machine. Maybe that was the problem. You know, I flew a mix onto it and then recorded that back into the computer to compare with the original. And I just couldn't really hear the difference. So it seemed to me that the only way to get any kind of noteworthy artifact out of it was just to push the signal really hard into it, which I'm pretty sure was just overloading the electronics. You know, it sounded all fucked up and crunchy and like squashed transients and stuff. So yeah, I just couldn't really find much use for it, and I was kind of disheartened and was so unable to integrate it in any meaningful way into my workflow that I just didn't really bother. And now it sits on the side looking very, very cool, but with very limited utility. And that was kind of it. That was my foray into tape. I mean, you know, I had worked with Steve Albini and I had seen the wonder of those Studer machines in full swing. But you know, the last session I did with him, I recorded simultaneously onto tape and onto computer, and I have since digitized those tape recordings so that I can have them running in parallel with the digital versions in a DAW, and you can't tell the difference, not in any meaningful way. You know, like, given my limited experience with tape, it was interesting in these talks to hear that Studer machines are basically the Swiss watches of reel-to-reel recording. So, you know, they're very high fidelity, and it figures because they sound absolutely crystal clear and like crisp to such an extent that you can't actually distinguish it from the digital recording. I mean, you just can't. If anyone wants to try that, then you know, maybe I'll put a link in the description where you can download the files for yourself and do a little blind trial on yourself. But you know, to my ear, I can't tell the difference. So, you know, what are we doing then? What's going on here? What is this tape sound? So we're using low fidelity tape to impart a sonic signature on the sound, which I guess is largely what was being spoken about, like recording at 15 IPS. So obviously there's a reason for that, because it alters the sound in some funky way, which, does its tape magic. So yeah, okay, cool. Very good. I'm happy to concede that working in the digital domain, like i.e. recording to a computer, is shit. It's shit for all kinds of reasons. I've run a studio for over 10 years now, and I've recorded loads of bands, done loads of sessions, and I absolutely understand the fallibility of digital recording. It couldn't be clearer to me. I think it fundamentally changes the character of one's experience when listening to music to have a screen blaring LED neon bullshit into your face. To have that as the focal point in the room that everyone sits and looks at, I totally understand why that is such a cognitive distraction to the perception of music. It's like a data stream that you just don't want. You want your subjectivity to integrate into the audio domain. You don't want it to be polluted by fucking colourful waves and edits and just like lines and just like shit on a screen. It's a complete distraction, and there's no real way around it either if you're recording on a computer. I was talking to my wife about it yesterday, and she said, can't you just turn off the screen? But I don't think you can. I think it's influencing you whether the screen's on or off, and that's totally borne out by how differently I hear something after I've bounced it down compared to when I know I can still fuck around with it. Like, the character of your experience is so subtly altered by these other factors. Like, I don't like the fact that you play back a recording or a mix or whatever, and everyone in the room just sits there like gawping at a screen. It's an obvious intrusion. So yeah, turning the screen off, no, you can't just do that, because everyone knows you can just turn it back on again. It's still there. It's still the eye of Sauron that's like watching everybody. So, I think it pollutes perception in a very unhelpful way. So, and I'm totally guilty of it, because that's how I work in my studio. It's how I've always worked, because hey, I'm a child of the digital age, right? I got my start in studios because the tape-based guys, or even the ADAT and Tascam guys, couldn't adapt to computer-based recording. So along comes the late Gen Xers, along come the millennials, and they've spent their teens taking PCs apart, playing overgrown Meccano with computers, totally computer savvy, knows how to hook up a computer, open up a bit of software and start fucking around in ways that older engineers couldn't do. So, you know, that was my pathway into music production. It was intrinsically linked to computer-based recording. You know, right at the very start of my career, I had a bit of experience mixing off tape machines, but, you know, not that much. So yeah, you know, for all of the fallacies, I do completely understand the utility of analog tape. And, you know, actually, I remember I once sent an email to Steve Albini to clarify his position on tape and his dislike of computers, and he sent me a really great response. Let me see if I can find it. Yep, okay, so here it is. So he says, okay, right, so he says, my reservations about digital recording have nothing to do with sound quality and everything to do with the basic process of recording. Digital recording systems grew out of digital editing systems, and their pedigree reflects a fundamental difference from analog systems. Digital systems were invented in order to manipulate sound, not record it. The bulk of a digital system's power comes not from its ability to make a faithful, durable recording, but from its ability to take already recorded sound and manipulate it. In this sense, they are inappropriate for simple audio recording because they have too much of their technology vested in the priority of manipulation. Indeed, quite a bit of secret manipulation of the music is done unasked for whenever a simple task is required. Additionally, because analog recording is a mature art, it is possible to learn and know all the systems intimately well, so that anything required of an engineer is almost a reflex response, and any problem has a solution that has been proved by experience. Since digital recording is all software-based, and software versions expire regularly, no individual recording system or standard survives long enough for anyone to become completely versed in it. In fact, spending the time to become fluent in a specific version of a software release is literally a waste of time, since the protocols and tools may very well change before the engineer has need for them. This leads to the paradoxical situation where the best, most in-demand engineers don't know their primary recording systems very well, and they must rely on online help and assistants and interns to keep up with the latest bug fixes, patches, techniques and capabilities of their systems. There is literally no other technical profession I can think of that structurally encourages its practitioners to remain novices and makes it impossible to become a virtuoso. Okay, don't know if I completely agree with that. The manipulative inclination and capability is often perceived as a powerful tool in the thinking that anything that needs attention can have an almost unlimited arsenal of tools and capabilities brought to bear on it. The fallacy in that thinking is that most problems don't require elaborate solutions, but the system and its capabilities encourages the opposite thinking. Perfectly fine original recordings end up chopped and tweaked and strange simply because it was possible to make them so. With tempo and pitch correction utilities, the tools themselves sometimes suggest changes which the engineer must actively decline to implement. It becomes almost impossible for a recording to make it through a digital session unaltered. The digital systems were invented to manipulate sound, and it stands to reason that anything run through them will get manipulated. One doesn't usually need much firepower to solve ordinary problems. it is conceivable that a recording and editing system could be used for mere recording, but hidden danger lurks. In the same way, if you didn't have a shopping cart, you could carefully press a Ferrari or a mobile artillery piece into service to go down the aisle at the supermarket. It's more powerful than you need, and it was designed for something else entirely, but you could do it. But if the Ferrari or the artillery piece decides to reveal its true nature inappropriately in the supermarket, all that extra power and capability becomes a liability and a danger rather than a resource. I hope this doesn't sound like the rambling of an old bastard. It does a little bit. I honestly have no grudge with the march of time or the advancement of technology. Certain aspects of digital recording are terrific, particularly the ease with which bands can learn to record themselves and get some experience. That's great. It's also great for casual stuff and commodity recording, advertising, video game soundtracks, etc., where permanence is not an issue and the recording is not being used for its own sake but to supplement something else. It's inappropriate for the naturalistic recording of music, that's all. Okay, interesting. I haven't read that email for some time. That's very interesting. So yeah, I mean, basically I agree with him. Computer-based recording screams change at you constantly, and it basically ensures that no one is ever satisfied. People drive themselves into fits of relentless, paralyzing perfectionism because the ability to endlessly tweak is never closed down. There's always an opportunity to reopen the session, to tweak this, to do that, move shit around, change the drums, whatever. I've had many emails at 4:00 in the morning from band members on the edge of despair, sitting in front of their speakers, listening for the 50th time, rocking back and forth, going, yeah, I'm still not sure about that kick drum. Can we move it here, and can we move it there, and can we try it with and without, and can we chop that and move that? Just the ability to fuck around with this thing just never ends. So it stops being the capturing of a moment. It's no longer the photographing of a performance. It becomes this infinitely elastic conceptual thing that can be endlessly fucked with, ultimately to the satisfaction of no one, because all that ever happens is everyone just gets sick of it, and the ability to discern anything objectively gets completely destroyed. So yeah, I agree with Steve there. Even as an experienced studio person myself, I'm not immune to the lure of perfectionist thinking. The way that something looks on a screen, the symmetry of the fades. I spend quite a lot of time organizing my projects and color coding them, and yeah, it helps. It helps me to conceptualize what I'm looking at and keep everything tidy and in its place. But I do wonder I do wonder about the necessity of the extent to which one is encouraged to do that. So yeah, the folly of computer-based recording. Someone said in one of the talks that recording to tape also gives you a kind of psychological breathing space. I think that's right. I think it does. I think it does make a difference when you can't just endlessly loop a bit of music and have it spin around forever and then straight back to the beginning, immediately after every listen. When you're working with a tape machine and your experience is bound to the mechanical operation of that device, then that has myriad subtle benefits to the psychology and the objectivity of everyone in the room. And also there's the fact of, like with a tape machine, there's just a big mechanical thing actively in motion. It's the thing that is producing the music. I think that changes the way you perceive it, and it changes the experience of it in an important way. And the knock-on effect of that is that it subtly influences your approach to the whole process. I think that imposing limitations on the creation of art and the creation of music is a good thing. I don't think it's beneficial to have, as Steve says, an artillery unit in a supermarket. There's just too much firepower there. It's like the Netflix paralysis that we're all regularly subject to now. Do you remember when we used to sit down in front of the telly to eat dinner and just watch whatever was on? There were only a handful of channels, so there was basically no choice. So you just watched anything, the best thing that was on. And through doing that, you would sometimes discover things that you probably wouldn't have chosen had you had the choice. But now we've got infinite choice. We've got Netflix, we've got Prime Video, we've got all of these streaming services. It's like fucking impossible now to decide what to watch. You've already eaten your dinner before you've even picked anything. So that is just the nature of the digital world that we live in. Just too much choice, man. I mean, I could go on a whole Spotify rant here as well, but let's save that for another video, eh? So yeah, I think good artists work their best when their palette is constrained. I remember going from a band of 3 people with instruments, like just 3 twats in a room, guitar, bass, drums. We go into a room, pick up our instruments and just play. And the whole experience was anchored to the chemistry of those individuals. And then years later, that evolved into a more conceptual project where we introduced laptops and Ableton and MIDI triggers and all kinds of other crap. And the whole thing was a complete disaster because we were just introducing far too many variables, like confusing the project. It couldn't establish its own identity. It just didn't know what it wanted to be. You know, we were just chucking too much shit at it. And that is the problem with a computer-based recording system. When you can put an infinite number of plugins on every channel, and there's nothing physically stopping you from doing that, then the whole thing can very easily get away from you. And you know, it takes a huge amount of restraint to resist that. It's taken me a long time to learn that restraint, and actually I still succumb to it. You know, it's difficult, especially now when you've got millions of plugins at your disposal. You know, tape as a medium constrains those impulses, and it limits the ugly imposition of digital computer-based recording. So yeah, you know, I think that's great. And so, you know what, fucking sign me up, man. I'm all for it. Like, I'm down with having my workflow revolutionized in that way, you know, for all the reasons I've just talked about. The problem is, you just fucking can't, you know, like, not anymore. Not with any reliability or practicality. It's a redundant technology. I mean, like, isn't that the elephant in the room here? This whole conversation is kind of academic, isn't it? Because nobody actually makes tape machines anymore. The only way to get one is to have thousands of pounds lying around. I mean, you know, how does that tessellate with the economics of producing music in 2025? Who the fuck is going to pay £350 for half an hour of 2-inch tape? Like, who's going to maintain this, like, fundamentally unreliable format endlessly? For all the complaints about computers going out of date or having to keep up with software updates, you know, and Albini's point about how it forces everyone to be a novice, you know, which I don't think is exactly true. You know, I do think that's a bit of a Luddite take. I don't think people are forced to be novices. I think that a take like that ignores the the excitement that comes with, you know, using new software and getting software updates and things like this. You know, I do all of my music production in Cubase, and every year when they release a new update, I feel excited. It's like, ooh, it's my Christmas present. I get to see all the new features and, you know, what they've done to it and whether they've addressed my problems. I find that experience enjoyable. And yes, you will have to contend with a handful of new bugs, and there are frustrations there. But, you know, it's not like so fundamentally different that I'm suddenly a novice again, trying to navigate my way through this incomprehensible new software. It's basically the same, just with like some new stuff in and some old stuff taken out. So yeah, I don't think it's correct for Steve Albini to admonish that entire enterprise as some kind of descent into perpetual amateurishness. I think that's disingenuous. I mean, I think it's just like wrong. That's a wrong perspective. There is cool stuff about using computers, and it can be very, very exciting. And there is something to be said for the novelty factor of updating your system. So, I think this speaks to why, all things considered, it's just easier. I mean, like, computers can be annoying, getting devices to interface with each other, and some update makes something fuck up in a way that you've got to now spend time to figure out. That's something I'm dealing with at my studio at the moment, and it's annoying because I've just upgraded my computer. But I don't know, you've got to weigh that against the headache of maintaining your tape machine. I mean, when those capacitors blow, and how much maintenance overhead is actually required to keep one of those things going. If you're at a certain level of your music production career where your needs are catered for in such a way that this stuff is like a kind of luxury for you, like, oh, I've got another 6 tape machines downstairs, and there's a Neve desk that I like to spread out all my mixes on. I mean, yeah, cool, man. Nice one. Like, good for you. That's not the position that most people are in. Most people are struggling to afford the cost of their little rented spaces, and they need to keep that work coming. I don't know that they've necessarily got the time or the understanding wives to have the benefit of being able to endlessly finesse their extremely niche interest in an archaic recording technology, irrespective of its myriad benefits. So I don't know, swings and roundabouts, innit? Yeah, I'd love to record on tape, but the barrier to entry is so high that I just don't see it being practical at all. We kept being told about the amazing resurgence of tape. The RTM guys were saying, tape is coming back. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've been to many studios far and wide, and tape is coming back in a big way. I mean, yeah. Cool. I mean, is it though? Is it actually? So yeah, there's like a revival narrative in the air, but RTM are now one of the only companies in the world manufacturing new analog tape stock. Doesn't that tell you something? Like, it's a vanishingly niche market. So no wonder they're on the forefront of advancing the narrative that tape is back, baby. Yeah, I don't think it is. I think a handful of studios have kept tape alive as a philosophical or aesthetic choice. And there's a small scene of boutique engineers and mastering houses who swear by it. That much is true. But like, outside of those circles, I'm pretty sure it's more of like a fetish object. Like, sales are up compared to a decade ago, but from what I gather, we're talking of like hundreds of studios globally using tape regularly, not thousands, and even those studios themselves are rapidly blinking out of existence. And that's mostly 1/2-inch or 1/4-inch, certainly not 2-inch multi-track. The economics just don't make sense for most working musicians or producers. So, yeah, it's back in the same way that vinyl is back. I mean, yeah, it's a prestige item. It's a talking point. It's not a practical foundation for the bulk of most modern music production. If I ask my clients, like, hey guys, tell you what, for an extra £1,000, we could whip out this tape machine. You know, it might sound good. It'll add, you know, weeks or months onto your project and explode your budget in a way that you are clearly going to object to. But, you know, how about we get my B77 out and start wrapping tape around mic stands and make like tape delays and stuff? We could totally do that. You know, I'll free up like a week in my schedule and then I'll charge you for that. How do you feel about that? I mean, you know, the obvious response I'm going to get back from that is, well, can't you just do it on there? Have you got a plugin that does that? I mean, you know, it just makes this whole conversation very academic, because at the grassroots level of music, the economics of it just don't add up. So yeah, I don't know. That's basically what I think. I do think some other stuff, but I'm pretty bored of talking now. So yeah, I don't know. Put like messages in the comments or whatever if you want to chat about it. I guess in summary, I would say I think tape is very, very cool. I'm all for it. I'd love to get my hands on it. And maybe I will. You know? Maybe this is the beginning of a new enlightenment in my thinking on all of this. But, you know, at the same time, I can't help but feel like it seems like kind of an elitist project and something that just isn't going to intersect well with the fundamental problems of trying to run a music production business or a studio in 2025. And for all of the elite fart sniffing about the wonders of this amazing, albeit antiquated technology, I do remain skeptical about its actual utility beyond the novelty of it. Yeah, anyway, there we go. What a load of bollocks that was. Make of that what you will. I'm going for a sandwich.